I have lived in the same tiny house for almost a decade, and to many people, it looks worn and unremarkable. The paint on the shutters is chipped, and the front steps creak when someone steps on them. Every time my family visits, they can't stop themselves from making remarks. They try to mask their judgments under polite smiles, but I hear the pity in their voices. It stings more than I care to admit. I grew up in a house full of people who believed that bigger always meant better. My father built a successful company before I was born, and the lavish lifestyle that followed became our norm. My siblings and I were expected to join the same mindset, aspire to large homes, luxury cars, and showy wealth. Yet, I never felt comfortable with excess. The more I had, the less I appreciated it. So, when I turned 23 and moved out, I picked this small home because it felt like a blank slate. It was mine to make cozy. I told myself that living simply was a healthier path. But now, each time my mother gently runs her hand over a peeling window frame, I feel her disapproval like a knife. I can't help but wonder if I made the right choice. My family's judgments first came in hushed whispers. They would glance around the cramped living room with raised eyebrows, quickly biting their tongues when I walked in. It became harder to ignore when my older brother Jackson started making jokes. He liked to tease me about my little dollhouse, as he called it. To him, it was nothing more than a stepping stone, something you outgrow once real success arrives. But I was never short on ambition or resources. By the time I bought this place, I'd saved a decent amount and even received a small inheritance from my grandfather. It wasn't about the money, it was about the peace I craved. I wanted a place that was mine alone, free from constant reminders to impress the world. The mocking didn't end with Jackson's jokes, of course. My Aunt Lydia took it upon herself to compare my walls to an unfortunate shoebox. My cousins snickered during family gatherings. My mother frowned as though she wished she could rescue me from a life of modesty. For a while, I swallowed my pride. I smiled politely at their remarks because I believed I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Yet, beneath that calm facade, I felt every barb. On the surface, my siblings and I get along, at least enough to have civil holiday dinners and exchange gifts. But the jabs about my tiny home were never far from mind. I had no desire to show off. My goal was to live quietly, keep my finances in check, and find emotional peace. Still, I couldn't shake that nagging urge to prove them wrong. One weekend, my parents visited me, bringing along a few new kitchen supplies they thought would brighten up the place. These visits felt like pity donations. I remember my father looking around my kitchen, noting how little cabinet space there was. He asked me if I planned to upgrade to something bigger soon. I responded, with calm I didn't feel, that I was content here. They left after an hour or so, but their concern lingered in the air. That night, I lay awake, thinking about what they'd said. A single question kept repeating in my mind. Why don't I just tell them the truth? I knew the reason. I wasn't ready to reveal my big secret. The property next door was quietly under my name, and it had the potential to dwarf everything my family owned. The estate next door was hidden behind tall, unkempt hedges. Its original owner had passed away years ago, leaving it to relatives who had no interest in maintaining a massive piece of real estate. Through a mutual contact, I discovered it was up for a discreet sale. By then, I'd already grown tired of the materialistic atmosphere at home, but I hadn't given up on the idea of a legacy. I wanted to do something that felt personal and long-term, far from my family's watchful eyes. I bought the estate anonymously, using a trust that shielded my name from public records. At first, I merely strolled around the grounds, overwhelmed by the vines choking the old pillars and the cracked stone pathways that meandered through the gardens. If my father had seen it, he would have snorted, "It's a money pit." Maybe he wouldn't have been wrong. Yet, I felt an unexpected sense of belonging there. Yes, it was run down, and yes, it needed a lot of work. But the bones of the structure were strong. As I walked through those dusty corridors, I imagined the possibilities, restoring the place to its former grandeur, turning it into something beautiful, something distinctly mine. Every day after work, I'd slip away to the estate, armed with cleaning supplies and basic tools. I'd wait for the sun to dip behind the rooftops before I ventured out, carefully avoiding being seen by any neighbors or passing relatives. It was a routine I quickly grew fond of. There was a secret thrill in renovating this hidden treasure while everyone believed I was struggling in a cramped bungalow. I started small, tackling the massive entrance hall first. The once polished marble floors were coated in dust, and the chandelier was missing half its crystals. I worked late into the night, sweeping, scrubbing, and carefully removing shattered glass. The physical labor proved oddly therapeutic. At times, I'd stand in the center of that grand foyer, letting my imagination roam. Someday, I thought, I might invite people in here for a celebration, and they'd gasp at the elegance. Perhaps my family would step inside with wide eyes and realize they'd been wrong about me all along. The idea made me smile, but I also knew it was a long road ahead. The estate's roof needed repairs, the wiring was outdated, and the grounds required a complete overhaul. Still, I pressed on. When friends asked why I was always so busy after work, I gave vague answers about a personal project. My best friend, Maria, had suspicions. She'd known me long enough to guess I was up to something big. She once cornered me in my living room and said, "You vanish every night. Either you're joining a secret society, or you've got a bigger plan than you're letting on." I trusted her enough to spill the truth, but only partly. I told her I was investing in property, nothing more. She raised an eyebrow, waiting for details, but I shrugged it off. Even with her, I couldn't bring myself to reveal the entire scope of the project. Maybe I was afraid of disappointment if things didn't work out. Meanwhile, my family's remarks about my small home continued. At a birthday party for my cousin, Aunt Lydia pointedly asked whether I'd saved enough to buy a real house yet. The sting was immediate, but I forced a grin, ignoring the heat in my cheeks. In that moment, I felt a surge of resolve. When the time was right, I'd show them I was not the helpless little homeowner they imagined. I still remember the day the scaffolding went up around the estate's facade. Contractors arrived early, and I was there to greet them, posing as a representative of the trust that owned the place. I wore a simple hoodie and jeans, hoping no one would look too deeply into my identity. The renovation team started stabilizing the old walls and tearing down sections that were beyond repair. Each hammer strike felt like a beat in my own heart, as if we were breaking through more than just brick and mortar. Despite the flurry of progress, I kept my secret close. My mother would call to invite me to family dinners, and I would go, listening to my siblings swap stories of their expensive home upgrades. They never even glanced at me long enough to suspect I might be doing something just as grand, if not more so. At one such dinner, Jackson bragged about the new swimming pool he was adding to his mansion. He cracked a joke, suggesting I install a kiddie pool in my yard. Everyone laughed, and I felt the usual pang of hurt. But this time, I also felt anticipation. I imagined the day I'd walk them through that grand estate. Behind the scenes, the work on the estate took on a life of its own. The once barren gardens were coming alive under the care of a local landscaping team. Old flower beds were weeded out, and tall hedges were trimmed and shaped. An overgrown fountain in the center of the courtyard was repaired. Water flowed from its stone angels for the first time in years. The transformation was subtle, but magical, inching me closer to a reality I sometimes still thought was a dream. At times, stress gnawed at me. The costs of repairs were high, and juggling my day job with nightly estate visits was exhausting. I had to dip into more of my savings than I planned, and that brought a nervous flutter to my stomach. But I couldn't stop. Every beam fixed, every cracked window replaced, made me feel more alive, more in control. Back at my tiny house, I played the role of a content recluse, fielding phone calls from my father who asked if I needed a loan for better accommodations. I politely declined. My nights were lit by the glow of hope, not just the fluorescent lamps inside that old manor. I held fast to my secret mission. By the time I approached the main reception room, I felt more confident than ever. Gone were the days when I tiptoed around dusty halls. Now, the estate felt like a second home, one I had poured countless hours and a piece of my soul into revitalizing. The reception room had high ceilings and towering windows that let in beams of sunlight. I remember brushing off layers of spiderwebs from the chandeliers and feeling a ripple of excitement. I ran my fingers along the walls, which displayed hints of old wallpaper. With a bit of restoration, it could be stunning, like the set of a historical drama. During the renovations, I stumbled upon a hidden cabinet tucked behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside, I found old letters and photographs, remnants of the estate's past owners. Seeing their faces and reading their handwritten notes felt eerie but also comforting, like I wasn't the only one who cherished this place. My world outside the estate was still fraught with family tensions. They thought of me as the unsuccessful sibling. Yet, every time they aimed a snide remark my way, I'd recall that hidden cabinet, the old letters, and the promise the estate held. And I'd smile inside. One rainy evening, as thunder rattled the windows of my little house, I received a call from Maria. She wanted to meet for coffee. Sensing her urgency, I agreed. We huddled in a corner booth at our favorite cafe, warm cups cradled in our hands. She leaned forward and said, "I know you're not telling me everything. You're tired and stressed, but you light up when we talk about renovations. Are you flipping a property or something?" I debated lying, but I trusted Maria. She'd always supported me, even when my family dismissed me, so I confessed. "I own the estate next door to my house. I've been restoring it in secret." She blinked, taken aback, then burst into a smile. "Why hide such an amazing thing?" I looked down at my coffee. "My family, they always mock my choices. I want to reveal it when I'm ready, when it's finished. I guess I need them to see me differently." Maria's smile softened. She reached out and gripped my hand. "You don't need their approval," she said quietly. "But I get it. I'm here if you need any help." Relief washed over me. Finally, someone else knew, and that made it feel more real. My parents loved hosting holiday gatherings, especially at Christmas. That year, they insisted we celebrate at my older sister Diane's new lakeside villa. The place was gorgeous, vaulted ceilings, a sleek fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows with a perfect view of the frozen water. My siblings praised her taste, while I stayed in the background, quietly admiring the decor. It wasn't long before the usual comments bubbled up. During dinner, Diane asked me, with an edge in her voice, if I'd saved enough for a down payment on a real house. Before I could answer, Jackson chimed in. "At least in a bigger place, you could host us for once." Laughter rippled around the table. I forced a smile but felt my hands clench under the table. In that moment, I nearly revealed everything. My throat tightened and my heart pounded. The words were right there. I own an estate, an entire mansion. But I stayed silent. Instead, I excused myself from the table, stepping onto the snowy balcony to breathe. As the cold air hit my face, I calmed myself. I wasn't ready to blow open this secret. Not yet. But their casual cruelty fueled my determination to finish the project. They'd see. The progress on the estate continued at a steady pace. Soon, the entrance hall was fully restored. New marble tiles replaced the cracked ones, and a team of specialists managed to fix the antique chandelier, adding fresh crystals that sparkled under the soft lighting. Even the grand staircase, which had threatened to collapse, was reinforced and polished to its former shine. Whenever I walked through the door, I felt like I was entering a luxurious dream of my own making. I began to envision hosting a formal gathering, maybe a family reunion, right there in the marble foyer. Imagining my family's stunned faces was almost enough to erase the sting of their comments. Yet, challenges kept coming. The roof repairs were more extensive than anticipated, and the wiring needed a complete overhaul to meet modern safety standards. My budget felt tighter with each invoice, and I knew I was betting everything I had on this estate. If something went catastrophically wrong, I'd be in trouble. A small whisper in the back of my mind questioned if I was chasing vanity, becoming just like my family in a different way. But then I'd look at the shining floors and the carefully restored woodwork, and I'd know. This was worth it. One afternoon, I caught a glimpse of my younger cousin Amber, strolling past the estate's front gate. She had moved to the neighborhood recently, but we rarely spoke. My heart pounded as I realized she might see me, or the construction workers, or sense something was amiss. Instinctively, I ducked behind a low stone wall. The last thing I needed was a family member asking why I was coming out of a supposedly abandoned mansion. Eventually, Amber disappeared down the street, oblivious to my presence. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Still, the close call rattled me. I was living a double life, one where I was the unassuming owner of a small home, and another where I was quietly resurrecting a forgotten estate. The tension was starting to wear on me. That evening, Maria came over to see the property for the first time. She stood in the foyer, eyes wide with awe, then squealed with delight. "This is breathtaking," she exclaimed, spinning in circles to take it all in. Her genuine excitement reminded me why I started this in the first place, because I loved the idea of giving new life to something the world had discarded. With Maria now in on the secret, I gained a confident ally. She offered to help with planning a grand reveal, but I told her I wasn't sure if I wanted a dramatic moment or something more subtle. Part of me craved that stunned silence, that moment of redemption, when my family finally saw how wrong they had been. Another part of me felt conflicted. Was I sinking to their level by seeking such a show? Meanwhile, life in my tiny house grew more tense. The ongoing renovations at the estate often left me exhausted, and my humble abode felt even smaller when I returned from the grandeur next door. My siblings still poked fun at me in group chats, sending me links to realtors who specialized in starter homes, as if I hadn't already taken the biggest leap of all. I started dreaming about the day I'd be free from this cloak and dagger approach. But the estate wasn't ready yet. There were too many final touches left. Decor, landscaping details, furnishings. I wanted it perfect. If my family was going to come see it, I needed every inch to shine, to reflect the love and effort I'd poured into every corner. Construction trucks became a frequent sight around the estate's grounds. Crews delivered furniture and replaced old fixtures. I worked closely with a designer who specialized in restoring historical homes. Together, we picked out color palettes that honored the building's past while adding a modern twist. The main hall was painted a soft cream that made the chandelier's light dance across the walls like golden shards. Despite the excitement, my finances were at a critical point. I'd spent most of my inheritance and a big chunk of my savings. Each new bill gave me a fresh pang of anxiety. But every time I questioned my decisions, I reminded myself of one simple truth. I wasn't just renovating a house, I was creating a sanctuary, a place that finally felt like an extension of who I was. One night, as I locked up the newly installed double doors, I gazed at the estate's windows gleaming under the moonlight. The facade looked almost regal. A wave of pride warmed my chest. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine inviting my family inside for a grand tour. Would they laugh? Would they apologize? Would they be speechless? Only time would tell. My mother's birthday was approaching, and she decided to hold the celebration at my father's estate, an opulent home filled with modern art and designer furniture. The invitation was formal, complete with embossed gold lettering. My siblings were abuzz in the family group chat, discussing gift ideas. True to form, they nudged me to pitch in for an expensive bracelet, implying my own contribution might be too small. When the day arrived, I stepped into my father's marble foyer, greeted by the sight of lavish decorations and a long buffet table loaded with gourmet dishes. My siblings paraded around in designer outfits, flashing their success in every possible way. I felt that familiar twinge of insecurity. In the midst of the chatter, my father pulled me aside. "You know," he said softly, "your mother and I could help you get a better place. It's not a handout, your family." I must have looked pained because he quickly added, "We just don't want to see you struggling." I forced a reassuring smile, replying that I was fine. But inside I was torn between frustration and gratitude. I knew they cared in their own way, but their sympathy was rooted in the assumption that I was failing. After the party, I found myself alone on the balcony, staring out at the estate's immaculate gardens. Memories of my childhood flooded in, running around with my siblings, naive to the world, dreaming of futures where we'd all be millionaires. We were taught to equate happiness with grandeur. I used to believe it, but somewhere along the line, I realized material possessions alone didn't fill the emptiness inside me. Still, I felt a growing need to defend my choices. It wasn't about wanting their approval, it was about wanting them to see me as capable. Their pity felt like a deep cut to my pride. I clutched the balcony railing, imagining my own estate next door, now nearly complete. The gardens were almost as extensive as my father's. It felt surreal. Back at my tiny house later that night, I glanced at the peeling paint and worn-out floors. My father's words echoed in my mind, "We just don't want to see you struggling." The next day, I contacted the designer to finalize the interior furnishings for the estate. I was done waiting. The time for secrecy was nearing its end. I wanted to show them, not out of spite, but to finally feel free. With the renovations entering their final stage, I decided on a garden party theme for the big reveal. The estate's grounds were now manicured, with a freshly trimmed maze of hedges and blossoming flowers in every corner. I'd even restored the old greenhouse, turning it into a glass haven of exotic plants. It was a setting straight out of a storybook. Maria helped me plan the event. We sent out stylish invitations to everyone in the family, but kept the location a surprise. Curiosity buzzed in our family chat. My siblings, used to hearing me say I lived in a cramped house, wondered where I'd be hosting such a fancy affair. My father presumed I'd rented some local venue. "You can't possibly accommodate all of us," he commented. I only smiled, giving no details. Inside, my nerves danced. I rehearsed how I'd greet them at the estate gates, how I'd watch their expressions shift from confusion to astonishment. Perhaps it was a bit dramatic, but this was my moment. For years, I'd swallowed their ridicule. Now, I was flipping the script. I reminded myself that this was also a celebration of my achievement, of every late night and early morning I'd invested. The day of the reveal arrived bright and sunny. That morning, I stood on the estate's stone terrace, watching caterers set up tables laden with fresh flowers, pastries, and fruit platters. White chairs lined the garden paths, and soft music drifted across the lawn. Butterflies fluttered in my stomach. I wore a simple outfit, nothing too flashy, and waited near the front gate, fidgeting with a guest list in my hand. One by one, cars pulled up outside. My mother and father arrived first, stepping out in formal attire, looking puzzled by the unfamiliar location. My siblings followed, each expression turning from skepticism to wide-eyed curiosity. Jackson approached me with a polite smile. "So you rented this place?" he asked, looking around. I took a breath, heart pounding, and opened the gates wider. "I own it," I said softly. A collective hush fell over them. They exchanged stunned glances, unsure if I was joking. So I led them inside, into the polished foyer, where the chandelier cast sparkling light over their astonished faces. In that moment, I felt a surge of victory tempered by something else. Relief. The secret was out, and I was finally free of their assumptions. My family walked through the estate in disbelief. They ran their hands along the smooth banisters of the grand staircase, peeked into elegantly furnished rooms, and marveled at the restored columns in the corridor. My father stood in the entrance hall, eyes glistening. "You did all this?" he asked, voice trembling slightly. I nodded, explaining how I'd found the property and chose to restore it quietly. Jackson was uncharacteristically silent, absorbing the ornate details around him. My mother brushed her hand across a delicate tapestry, tears threatening to spill. She looked at me with a mix of pride and guilt. "We never knew," she whispered. Cousins and aunts hovered nearby, uncertain how to react. Some offered congratulatory remarks, others simply wandered, eyes full of awe. The estate was alive with chatter and clinking glasses, the once empty halls now filled with laughter and celebration. Caterers served refreshments, and it felt like a dream to see everyone enjoying a place once left to decay. But beneath the celebration, I could sense the family's confusion. How had I afforded this? Why keep it hidden? Their questions hung in the air. I chose to savor their wonder a bit longer before offering any real explanations. As the party continued, my father gathered the family in the courtyard for a toast. The restored fountain gurgled gently, adding a serene backdrop to the moment. He raised his glass, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. In a voice filled with emotion, he said, "I never imagined that behind your modest exterior, you were orchestrating something so magnificent. We may have underestimated you, and for that, I apologize." A ripple of agreement passed through my relatives. Some murmured apologies, others offered bright smiles. My sister Diane stepped forward, giving me a quick hug. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, though her expression carried a hint of envy. I thanked them, but the moment felt surreal. All those years of snide remarks and backhanded compliments now culminated in public admiration. A wave of validation rushed through me, but it was tinged with sadness. Had it really taken owning a grand estate for them to respect me? Still, I decided to accept their goodwill for what it was. I raised my glass and spoke, my voice stronger than I expected. Thank you for coming today. I hope this reminds everyone that you never really know what someone is capable of. After the toast, conversations buzzed around me, but I noticed an undercurrent of unease. My siblings huddled together, whispering among themselves, perhaps shaken by the abrupt shift in our family dynamic. My mother, though beaming with pride, had questions in her eyes. She approached me as guests continued to mingle. "Why hide all this?" she asked softly. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my emotions. "I was tired of everyone assuming I was a failure," I said, more candidly than I intended. "I wanted to do something for myself without the pressure or judgment." She looked wounded, but also understanding. "We never meant to hurt you." Her words were sincere, but they didn't erase the years of belittling. I forced a small smile. "I know. But it did hurt. I wanted to prove to myself and to all of you that I'm not just settling for less." She wrapped me in a gentle hug, whispering, "I'm sorry." I felt tension slip away, replaced by a cautious relief. Our relationship wouldn't be perfect overnight, but this was a start. Back inside, I watched the rest of my family take in the grandeur they once believed I could never achieve. And for the first time, I felt truly at peace. The celebration wound down at dusk. Soft lights illuminated the gardens, and a mellow atmosphere replaced the earlier buzz. Some relatives left, shaking my hand or offering quick hugs. Others lingered, sipping the last of the champagne as they wandered the estate, reluctant to leave. I found Jackson standing by a large bay window, staring out at the meticulously tended lawn. He turned when he sensed me nearby. "You really showed us all, huh?" he said with a wry grin. I shrugged, unsure how to respond. Jackson had been the most vocal critic of my small house. "I wasn't doing it to show anyone up," I replied quietly. "I just wanted a place that felt like me." He took a moment, then faced me, a surprising sincerity in his eyes. "I guess I assumed you were settling for less. I didn't think." He stopped, searching for words. "I'm impressed." A tension I'd carried for years dissolved in that moment. I realized I no longer needed to hold on to resentment or shame. The estate represented my ambition and perseverance, but it also became a catalyst for understanding. Maybe Jackson and I would never be best friends, but we had a chance to start over. In the days following the party, a curious calm settled over my relationship with my family. The phone calls became more frequent, but with less judgment. My father wanted to talk about property management. My mother asked if she could bring her book club over to tour the estate. Even my siblings seemed genuinely interested in my projects, though I sensed a bit of competition in their voices. I reflected on what it meant to keep secrets. For so long, I believed hiding my achievements was the only way to protect myself from their judgments. But as I walked through my newly restored halls, I realized I'd also deprived myself of support and celebration along the way. Maria, always the voice of reason, reminded me that self-worth shouldn't hinge on someone else's recognition. I agreed, understanding now that true confidence comes from within. Yes, part of me relished seeing them finally acknowledge my capabilities. However, the estate itself had become more than just proof of my success. It was a tangible symbol of my determination and passion for bringing beauty back to neglected spaces. Whether my family admired it or not, it would always be mine. Life didn't become a fairy tale after the big reveal. My siblings still had moments of envy, and my parents still offered advice I didn't ask for. But the ridicule I'd endured for years was replaced with a begrudging respect. We continued to have disagreements, but now I felt stronger, more grounded. I no longer lived in a small house under a cloud of pity. I had carved out my own place, both literally and metaphorically. I decided to keep my little house for sentimental reasons. It reminded me of my journey, how I started in the simplest of settings while nurturing a grander vision next door. Sometimes I slept there, comforted by its cozy familiarity. Other nights, I stayed in the estate's master suite, listening to the wind rustle through the restored trees and vines. As for my family, they learned a valuable lesson. Appearances don't always tell the full story. My father still shakes his head sometimes, marveling that I accomplished so much in silence. My mother, always the matriarch, tries to be more respectful when it comes to my decisions. And me, I'm content. I proved to myself that true success lies in living authentically, whatever shape or size that may be.